The Survivors, an original novel by James Armand Clayton. As never before, the essence of war is fire, famine, and pestilence. They contribute to its outbreak. They are among its weapons. They become its consequences. Dwight D. Eisenhower. Prologue. In the year 1965, in the United States, on a hot August night in Southern California, a riot broke out. As with most riots, it started with a small, routine, and virtually unnoticeable item. In this case, it was a routine arrest of a drunken driver. The fact that it was a Negro who was being arrested was hardly of any major consequences. What followed was 35 persons, including 2 police officers and 1 fireman, were killed. 926 were seriously wounded. Property damage was estimated at close to $50 million, with 744 buildings destroyed or damaged by fire. 4,289 persons had been arrested. In October 16, 1965, The Guardian, a British newspaper, stated the secret weapon Nikita Khrushchev had bragged about, an atomic-powered rocket, blew up in 1960, killing a Soviet marshal and 300 other persons. In October 21st, Great Britain proposed that negotiations should be started immediately on a treaty to halt the spread of nuclear weapons. Khrushchev got the boot and Red China got the bomb. And by the end of 1966, the rioting was going both ways, with Negroes rioting against whites and whites rioting against Negroes. In South Vietnam, the endless war continued. The U.S. landed a surveyor on the moon and fired the Saturn I. They also predicted a man on the moon, or 3 men to be exact, by 1968. Aside from all the major announcements of the current times of turbulence, which were those days of long ago, a scientist, George Wilson, a quiet and unassuming man, collected a small fortune from 2 minor inventions which never reached the news, and just as quietly retired with his Colombian wife. Wilson and his wife Maria and their 1-year-old baby boy retired to a small valley in the Colombian Andes foothills. There, with a large supply of gasoline and a powerful generator, Wilson built a large laboratory to do some unspecified research. In the United States, in the early 1970s, a group of scientists gathered at Columbia University to work on 2 major breakthroughs which might eventually provide cures for radiation sickness, or radiation poisoning, as it was sometimes called, and even against the painful radiation burns. This would be used mainly in cases where a nuclear scientist might become exposed to radiation, as in the case of an underground test explosion. There would never be an atomic war. There were too many safeguards. Men were too wise to risk such ultimate havoc in any case. If such a war started, there would be no survivors to administer the various injections and pills necessary in an all-out thermonuclear warfare. The federal government did not see it that way. They insisted the supplies of the drugs and vaccines be placed in all survival shelters, but this was of secondary interest. Everyone was wondering about the new permanent space station in the sky and the new colony on the moon and the coming exploration of Mars. Chapter 1. In a small cubicle surrounded by knobs and dials, tubes and wired transistors sat a man. He listened to the sounds from his earphones. Tentatively, his hand reached for a switch. There was a soft click as the pointer moved from phone to speaker, but the loudspeaker made no noise save for the usual space static. The man's fingers flipped other switches and swung a pointer below the word circuits from the 1 to the 2, and still there was no response. He continued to turn it 2 and then to 4 and then to 5. Each time it clicked, each time there was only space static. His other hand moved, switching on emergency 1, but still just static. He flicked another switch, emergency 2, nothing. Suddenly, decisively, the man swung around to the intercom and flicked a switch marked MC for Mars Command. Sir? Yes, Pete. Can't get ground, sir. Earth won't come in at all. No, sir. No joy on any circuit, not even the emergency lines. Our output is okay, but there are no incoming signals, not even a carrier wave. Confirms lunar report, sir. Any suggestions? Yes. Sound general quarters. We are going home. The Survivors. Part 1. The Day Before Hell. Chapter 1. Crisis. General Murdoch demanded and received priority, leaving 2 senators, an assemblyman, and an ambassador in the waiting room. He was only a 2-star general, but he headed Military Intelligence 1, and his report could not wait for the National Security Council to act. Come on in, John. I was just finishing my breakfast. Have a piece of toast? The president appeared in good spirits. Huey was always smiling. Thank you, sir, but I'm afraid what I have to tell you doesn't give me much of an appetite. Come, John. After Vietnam, what could do so bad? I'm afraid the CIA was right, sir. Red China does have satellites in orbit, a polar orbit. Is it the worst like the CIA say? The president asked, suddenly growing serious. I'm afraid it is, sir. As usual, they've ignored everybody. Put a base of perhaps 10 thermonuclear weapons into orbit. Think they'll fire them? No, sir, not right away. They'll want to put at least 3 or 4 more bases up there first, completely knockout punch on one go-round. Can they do that? They wouldn't succeed, but they might do enough damage to where we'd have to attack to protect ourselves, but they don't know that, or refuse to believe it, or just don't give a damn. The president nodded slowly. The weight of his office hung around his neck, threatening to choke him. Well, we let West Germany build a steel mill for them. What a ghastly error that was. My predecessors didn't see it that way, of course. Thought it was just a minor thing. Oh, hell, John. I want that satellite and every missile-based satellite they send up destroyed. I don't care how, even if we have to shave the laws of space, which we so righteously have upheld. It must be done at all costs. Understand? Yes, sir, the general answered firmly. All need some authority. I'll issue a closed command statement. My secretary would type up a letter in 5 minutes before all hell breaks loose. Sing Lee had a member of the Red Guard where it had first started its terrorist campaign back in the middle and late 60s. Now, after the university, he was a scientist, militaristic leader. He knew how to follow orders, and he had shown the Central Command exactly what would happen. The fact that the Americans would die assembling the first space bomb satellite, disassembly the first space bomb satellite was unimportant. They could send up 5 such satellites within 3 minutes and trigger them as they passed over the U.S. the first time. And 50 megaton, the thermonuclear bombs, would be scattered across the face of the United States. The leaders, Singhai included, and most of the Red Chinese Communist Party members would be in the vast underground shelter in the Gobi Desert by then, and who would drop a bomb there? And what good would it do if they did? Today would be the crisis. If the prices stayed low enough, James Sanders could buy, with luck, the remaining 50,000 shares necessary to gain marginal control of the United States Robots and Computers, Inc. After that, he could write his own ticket. Briefly, he glanced out at the scenery along the Wilshire Boulevard. In a few minutes, the monorail would reach downtown Los Angeles, and then he would see if his luck still held. He glanced at his watch. It was 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That would make it noon in New York. It was midnight on the Gobi Desert when the 25 men slipped silently through the shadowless night. It would be 9 in Los Angeles, noon in Washington, but these men did not consider that. Each of them had worn a green beret, but now they carried sterile equipment. They were on loan to the CIA. Their job was to infiltrate and occupy a certain underground fortress in the Gobi Desert, southwest of the Ulaanbaatar, near the Mongolian border. They did not know of the launching schedule within 11 and 1/2 hours, nor could they determine the horrors which were to follow. At 5 p.m., Lieutenant Colonel Johnson and 3 men from the space station Alpha brought their orbital ship rocket alongside the Red Chinese platform and boarded it. Once aboard, they moved quickly. After detaching each warhead, they went to work on the gingerbread electronic firing system, methodically ripping out every wire and tube. Then they simply removed each missile and gave it downward momentum, which would put it into a decaying orbit. Eventually, all the hardware would be just so much ashes in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The President of the United States glanced at the message from the space station Alpha. He was en route to a 1 p.m. luncheon date with Ambassador Murphy, an old friend from his home state of California. His thoughts were interrupted by the telephone. "Yes?" said Mr. President. "Mr. President, I think it would be advisable for you to spend the night elsewhere, say at Security 2. The President didn't appreciate the head of the CIA giving his advice. Hansen overdid it too often. "What's so special about tonight, Sam?" "Well, sir, we have a report that the Red Chinese have 5 satellite-based launchers ready to go. Up till now they have not been ready, but they are now ready. The test they made was successful, and most of the bigwigs are leaving Peking." "You think it's going to?" "Yes, sir, between sunset and sunrise." "How about the Russians?" "The Kremlin is already empty, sir. In fact, most of the military is moving east and fanning out. The politicals are completely gone. Unofficially, they've advised us that they suspect the Red Chinese have something planned, but they're not saying what. Probably because they have only scanty information like us." "Okay, Sam, I'll do what I can." He pressed a button and scrambled. The railroad from Lanchow on the Yellow River to Urumqi had been improved and modified for this run. Earlier in the day, others had taken the railroad from Peking to Ulaanbaatar, where they boarded helicopters. The train would stop before Singli reached Urumqi. At a certain point, he would get off and climb into a helicopter. Everything was timed to the second. From the helicopter, he would give the radio signal launching, and that would be the end of the United States. Lieutenant Ken Mason took the call. There was no doubting the voice, not the authority. "Yes, sir," he responded. In front of him was a red button. He pushed it and moved toward the down elevator. In the underground 24-man war room, the word had been received at the same time Lieutenant General Mason received it. The military went on red alert. At SAC headquarters, an order was issued. Within 20 minutes, 150 B-70s were airborne, followed, and with 150 B-58s and 100 B-52s shortly thereafter. All refueling planes were in flight, as well as Motjus aircraft across the nation. Minuteman, Titan, Juniper, Thor, Ajax, and new Saturn VII missiles were alerted, and countdown to the final hold point was made. At Cape Kennedy, a special rocket was wheeled out from seclusion. Within 30 minutes, it was in orbit and catching up with the space station. Within the hour, the vehicle of peace would become a vehicle of war. Beneath the serene sea, some 75 polar missile-carrying atomic submarines moved silently and swiftly to appointed positions. Meanwhile, some 51 Soviet missile-carrying submarines pointed to their respective positions. Every Soviet plane which could fly was airborne, and every missile site was ready. The world was poised for disaster. James Sanders felt the pressure ease. He had control of United Robots and computers. It was in his advantageous grip. The price was going up, but he had spent his last cent getting those 90,000 shares, and now he had 40,000 shares to sell and still hold control. And oh boy, how rich he would be. He reached for the telephone. Tonight, Cindy and he would celebrate. There had been a guard at the entrance, and he had died. They had expected a division, but had encountered only 52 guards and soldiers. It had been a pitched battle. 15 minutes later, 52 were dead, along with 5 members of the Special Forces group. They waited in silence, watching the helicopters land. The president was watching Needet's screen when Hansen found him. "Nothing so far," the president said softly. "Any word from Major General Murdoch?" "Last I heard, he was over Manaus. Should be on Rio by now." "What's the story?" "Army and Air Force to maintain some order and reestablish a government of the world. Ecuador, Uruguay, and Argentina are in on it. So's Colombia and Venezuela. If worse comes to worse, they'll probably have the best chance of pulling through." "Sounds like a good plan, but you didn't tell the CIA about it?" "It was all diplomatic stuff till now. I just hope they don't have a change of heart." "Not now, sir. Not when the chips are down. What would you say the odds are?" "I'd hate to even guess, Sam." Chapter 2. 3 hours to doomsday and counting. Darling, will you marry me? She turned and looked at James Sanders and nodded. Yes, yes. She, her eyes from the lights of the city. He could see the light in her eyes. Their lips met with a warmth and tenderness which was theirs alone. We can be in Las Vegas in 4.5 hours, he said. She kissed him again. Let's go, she said softly. He put the car into gear, glanced over his shoulder, signaled, and pulled out into the street. Two blocks later, he swung left onto Los Feliz towards the freeway. The President of the United States read the report in 15 seconds. He was quite proud of his ability at speed reading. It enabled him to memorize long speeches within an hour, often within 15 minutes, and it made him one of the most informed and knowledgeable presidents ever to walk in the Oval Room. It was to speed reading that he attributed the victory of his last election, and those who knew about it also gave it respect as enabling the president to wade through a vast, clear, and concise picture, while others would be floundering on the third paragraph. In addition to speed reading, he also had a concept of the revised, formerly new mathematics, which enabled him to perform various mathematical calculations in a very short time. This method, however, was used in most of the schools, so it was not until lately had been made part of the general curriculum. The president picked up the telephone as Sam Houston entered the room. He nodded to the head of the CIA and indicated a seat. Then he spoke into the phone. Get me Ambassador Murphy. Try the State Department. He paused as the call went through. Ambassador, I want you on a plane for the Antarctica in 30 minutes. No, I'm not kidding, he said after another brief pause to hear the reply. Look, George, all hell's about to break loose and I don't know what to do. We may have a nuclear war on our hands within an hour or so. At least that's what it looks like. He paused again. No, not Russia, Red China. They haven't figured just how good their intelligence is. I haven't been able to get through to Moscow. It seems they're already abandoned in favor of immediate emergency mobilization. Another pause. Now I'm at Security 2. I'm sending you down there with command orders. After this thing gets going, start putting the pieces back together. We don't know if Security 2 will survive or drop. Thanks, George. The president hung up the telephone. Well, he stopped and picked up the phone again. Get me Lieutenant General Mason at the Pentagon Emergency Security. While waiting for the call, the president glanced at the NUDETS board. Nothing yet, and then standby orders for the space station. A-OK? And then, General Mason, this is the president. Ambassador Murphy will be at the airbase shortly. I want a plane ready for him, a trip to our Antarctica emergency base. We have a division training there now? Good, yes, top priority. Followed by Space Station Alpha, Lieutenant Colonel Johnson, Red China will be sending up 5 of those launching platforms. You have 25 Mark 10 missiles. I want you to blast as many of those launching platforms as possible. I know it's a hard job, but you do your best. Thank you. Mostly routine, sir. The president nodded. They were ready with everything, he said aloud. No telling what will happen once the attack is underway. Do the Chinese have any submarines? No, the Russians have 51 missiles carrying subs. Red China didn't get any since that was during after the Soviet split, and the temperature's been cool ever since. But Red China has quite a few rockets, and when the Chinese get going, you know what the Russians will or won't do. The president shrugged. But why? Hard to say, really. They've been repeated famines and all kinds of diseases behind the bamboo curtain. Perhaps it just became too much. Remember what John Foster Dulles once said? Dictatorships usually present a formidable exterior. They seem on the outside to be hard, glittering, and irresistible. Within, they are full of rottenness. And Colton said, rats and conquerors must expect no mercy in misfortune. So be it. Sir, the president picked up the phone. Give me the State Department. Who's on duty there? Oh, good. Look, I want you to get messages through to the Russians and the Chinese. You tell them that if those launching platforms go up again, we'll consider it an act of aggression and will retaliate with every available weapon with power at our command. He waited. That's right. And get to it immediately. I don't care how you do it. Well, Sam, we're committed, the president said softly, hanging up the telephone. Physical evils destroy themselves or they destroy us. Rousseau had once said, now it could do both, but this did not bother Singhai. He had but one thought, and that was to unleash the horror of his 5 launching platforms and the bombers and other rockets with their payloads of mass death. There were no considerations in his mind as to why he should do this. It had been ordered, and he did not care why. He did not think of the 1 billion people in Red China, many of whom were starving. He did not think of the diseases, spearhead of a vast national sickness. He did not think of a Red China of massive deaths without the bombs, nor of the populist revolts which were building through the nation. Driven on by desperations, he didn't even care. His thought was on watching New York City disappear in a singular flash. To him it was a gratifying thought. Commander William B. Stanton, U.S.N. commander of the nuclear-powered Polaris missile submarine Seaweed, faced the Christmas tree, a conglomeration of lights which told the story of all activities aboard and around his submarine, and wondered about the red alert. His orders were clear-cut, of course. At full speed he was headed to a certain point in the South China Sea, where he would hold out and await the word on whether this was it, or whether it was just a routine practice. Such secretive drills had been held before, and he did not learn of them. This time, however, he had an uneasy feeling still. It was all routine. He simply carried out orders. And if the super-secret communications device rang true, and if the order came, he would launch his missiles and quietly slip out and submerge, proceed to a certain island in the Pacific, which would be the rendezvous point for 5 submarines of his group. Later, according to schedule, these 5 would join 5 other groups of 5 as part of the total force, and then to put into one of the 3 security bases set up for just a war. The Seaweed was one of the newest of the missile-carrying submarines. Most of them had 16 or 20 missiles. The Seaweed carried 30. She was big, as submarines go, carrying a laser beam gun, torpedoes, 2 heavy-caliber deck guns, plus numerous small arms and automatic machine guns. She could stay submerged for a year without resurfacing for anything. William B. Stanton had not started the war, but he was prepared to finish it. General Murdoch and General Hernandez rode together to the super-secret base in the fastness of the Mato Grosso, Brazil. Murdoch observed was still booming. On the outskirts of the Brasilia, another new and vast manufacturing plant was being built by Esso of Brazil, probably one of the petroleum byproducts, a plastic perhaps. The oil reserves of Brazil were just coming into their own now, which was a satisfying fact, considering the different general difficulties now encountered with the U.S. petroleum fields, which were driving up. And so, Murdoch was saying after they passed the outer perimeter security post, when Space Station Alpha said they could take care of the attack satellite, I informed the president and he told me about the other 5 and sent me down here. Hernandez nodded. It looked bad. Fortunately, they had much more time than they had originally. They had much more time than they had originally supposed, but there was no way to stop it. The Russians would attack after the Chinese fired those missiles. They would have no choice. The age of reason was gone. Murdoch drew out his Willard imported briar pipe, took it from his mouth, and contemplated the silver band and yellow dot of his mouthpiece, and then the blackness of its bowl. You think it's the end of the world? Murdoch shrugged. As we know it, he said softly. Now, let's see what you've devised. The car slowed down for the median perimeter. The 8 members who survived in the Special Force CIA Combined Operations stood watch silently. They were at the front entrance, and the stench which rose from a certain room in the underground complex southwest of the Ulaanbaatar did not reach them, but the memory did. For in that room they had piled the bodies of many of the Red Chinese elite. Now they waited for the rest to arrive and would wait there until they were all dead. There were only one other alternative, but they could stay there and survive for 1 week. It was not a matter of food nor water, just survival. Sing Lee stepped down from the train and moved quietly toward the waiting helicopter. Excitement raced with his blood and his palm and his pulse. It would be soon, very soon. In his hand, like a suitcase, was a long-range radio device to launch the platforms. This he put into the helicopter first. Lieutenant General Mason watched the board intently. The Russians were out in force. BMEWS then pinpointed. All missiles were at 2-minute status. Then B-52s, B-58s, and B-70s were airborne. As were all planes of SAC, the Tactical Air Command, NATO, was alerted, and the British had their bombers airborne. No one knew exactly how much the Russians would be hit or what they would strike with. That was reserved for perhaps a dozen or so people. It would be in this Eurasian range, which meant no more Russians and no more Red China. It might also mean no more USA. Mason glanced down at the main floor, and the 9 men who had, upon orders from the president or his command post, issued quoted orders to attack the Nudit system, recorded nothing. The president lit a cigarette. Nothing from BMEWS, nothing from observation satellites. Even 1969Z was silent, and it was the most sensitive. It could detect, so they said, a Soviet officer lighting a cigarette. The Soviets had their strike force ready, of course. Why didn't they answer the lot line? Perhaps Red China was the only offender, perhaps? And the 1969Z and BMEWS at Glear, Alaska, pinpointed it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rocket launchings in Red China, orbital status. The message was automatic relayed to Space Station Alpha. The station had spotted the launchings. Lieutenant Colonel Johnson and his crew swung into action. 5 of the 25 missiles, Mark 10s, were launched immediately. Johnson watched as they headed off toward the Chinese platforms. 30 seconds later, he launched 5 more. The Red Chinese had anticipated such action, but not the swiftness of it. They had sent a missile too, and as the second group of Mark 10s left the station, Space Station Alpha disappeared in a blinding flash. All stations, the president said slowly, the enemy has hit Space Station Alpha.